Across the last 3 years, Centria has been on a mission to fundamentally transform the model of care for our clients, our staff, and the industry.
We will share with you our journey towards assent-based care, the lessons we've learned, and the people we've learned them with.
We're your hosts, Timothy Yeager
and Hillary Laney.
Welcome to the HRE podcast.
I'm so glad you could come.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really, we were just saying this, but I'm gonna say it again, but like I have watched you in online spaces for a long time and presentations, and I feel like we are in many of the similar, like we have overlapping groups of people that we interact with, and your name comes up all the time. And I watched you at ASIABA a couple of years ago, and I just through all of those interactions, I have seen a lot of my values come out in the things I see from you, which is like, how do we treat our clients? How are we responsive to the autistic community? But I've also seen you talk about this in the concept of staff and the concept of organizations, and like, how do we organize around this idea that this isn't just staff, like this isn't just clients that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And so we are really excited to talk with you today because I think you have a really valuable perspective to share around how we set our staff up for success, and the idea of like HRE isn't just for kids, it's for every human. So I'm really excited to hear, and I was hoping you could start by introducing yourself and sharing about you, what you do, where you live, all of the really interesting things about you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. So my name is Mari, and I am here in Texas. So a little bit about me, I started teaching back in 2003. I was a special ed teacher, and I was introduced to ABA then, and I want to say it was right before the certification board became a thing. So it was a wonderful woman named Marie who really shaped my understanding of ABA, and it being very much about this kind of contextual environment and my role in that environment and the influence that I had in it as the very first thing to be aware of. And so, went through, being a SPED teacher, got my BCBA, went back and got my master's, got my PhD, started my own business, and started a nonprofit all at the same time, which now that looking back, my husband was like, I don't know what you were thinking, but I was just there for the ride. I wasn't going to tell you anything to do your PhD, a nonprofit, and a business all at the same time. So I have 3 wonderful children who really challenge me and even just challenge the whole science of ABA. My youngest especially, he's phenomenal. So they bring about this sense of humility for me, being a practitioner. And then, my husband, who's just absolutely incredible, he has been probably my number one supporter for all of this, and really just telling me like, hey, the stuff that you've gotten in trouble for, like when you were a teacher, like just keep sharing that, it's going to resonate somewhere with people. And so probably back in like 2020, 2021, I was like, okay, let me do this Instagram thing and see what happens. Yeah. And so, that's a little bit about me.
What is your Instagram handle?
It is autie.analyst, and a lot of people mistake it for auntie, but I'm like, no, it's Autie, AUTIE.analyst.
And it's a great one. I follow everything that you put on there, and it's wonderful. Before we jump in any further, I was curious if you could share about your business and like what you do at your work.
Sure. So I opened Lighthouse Learning Center in Lubbock, Texas. And really it was to live out these values that, I've just really clung to for so long. And, I would tell my friends, like, I don't want to start a revolution. I just want to build a model, and build a model that people can see and say, oh, I can do that too. Yeah. Especially where I'm currently living, it's very, we're still catching up, to put it kindly, in education spaces, in ABA spaces. We're still catching up to things people are doing, on the East Coast and the West Coast. And so really being able to say, like, this is something that is possible. As a small business owner, I pulled out all of my teacher retirement to start this business. Wow. And the intent was to primarily serve our Medicaid families. Mm-hmm. There's not very many clinics or home, agencies that really want to include that demographic. And so, it was like, these families deserve that quality of care too. Mm-hmm. And so with that has come challenges. We know Medicaid reimburses at 48% of what private insurance reimburses.
Especially here in Texas.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's been a labor of love and just a challenge. But what makes it worth it is having this team that, I try to tell them every single day, like, we wouldn't be here without you. Like, none of the stuff that I do, none of these initials behind my name, they don't mean anything without each and every one of you. So that's my little clinic. We also have our nonprofit arm, which is the LEAP Institute. It is something that is tiny, but it has just been ever evolving. It started out as offering free supervision cohorts to marginalized students that we all kind of know that, with that supervision experience, it's hit or miss, right? If you can find someone that's willing to supervise you, and then if they're not charging an arm and a leg. So it's like, I don't want our field to become this kind of like gate kept, like, you can become a BCBA if you can afford it.
Right.
Yeah.
So
it already
that
has
was,
enough of that.
Yeah.
And so, LEAP kind of started out that way, and then, the teacher in me was like, let's do this e-box, like this subscription e-box where supervisors can get like a monthly topic. It has the PowerPoint presentation, it has the articles that go with it. They can it's ready to go, because being a BCBA and being a clinic owner, I knew what it was like to be so busy.
Yeah.
So to kind of cut that out for them and like, here you go, this is it for you, and you can, make it bigger, you can add more to it, you can take away. But just making that experience easier for both was something that we wanted to do. So now LEAP, our hope is, if our little clinic can keep, trucking along, is that LEAP partners with Lighthouse to become more like a supervision site, a fellowship site, so to speak, where students that can come and get that hands-on experience, get some sort of like stipend or compensation for it, and really learn, right? Because I think there's this gap from coursework to practice as well.
Yeah.
That we really need to address.
I'm sorry.
Well, and
it's significant.
And just even like our current, 40-hour onboarding model, like, oh my gosh, you want 40 hours to teach someone how to work with,
Vulnerable
autistic
people.
children who may have some very serious, dangerous, responses, and this person has 40 hours, like 1 week of training, and it's not just to work with that child, it's to know how to use their iPad and the data collection system and all of these things. But what a lot of people don't realize is that as a business owner, you invest, because we can't bill for that, right? So do I invest just 40 hours and start, billing, or and risk turnover, or do I nurture these young adults coming in and give them more, and then look at our non-existent,
margins,
revenue and margins, and so it's really one of those kind of challenges that, it keeps you up at night, but I don't think I could do anything else.
There's something you said that, like, I don't know if it's coincidence or what's happening, but that's been resonating across a lot of conversations we had, which is when you said you learned about behavior analysis and that you were part of the environment. And I think peers oftentimes in the BCs that we work with often don't take that into consideration, that they're part of the context. And I think as a leader, that's a very critical skill set for you. Like, when you're thinking about culture, you're thinking about supporting staff, the contingencies include you in those, and you're part of that. And I'm wondering if there's some things that maybe we could discuss around or talk through, like things that you've learned or as a leader of a business, and like things that you had to go through to understand your impact in that way.
Definitely. I think, I'm going to age myself, being 43, and just my lived experience, right, as, a marginalized person, and as someone with people coming in that have impacted my environment, and kind of that privilege that they have of being able to, like, oh, I don't know what that feels like. That really shapes you as a leader to be very hyper aware of, like, what am I saying and doing in this moment that is influencing this person's experience with me? And just a tiny plug, we just finished a book that we were just talking about, and the very first chapter is on practicing self-reflection, right? Like, nothing else can happen in this framework that we're building without first looking at self. And so it's so critical to, like you said, it's a skill that we don't teach, in coursework. Like, So I feel like a lot of behavior analysts and even RBTs come into the work and they feel like they're like David Attenborough, where they're kind of like narrating, but like we're not in the environment, you know, we're not disturbing. It's like, no, you're right in the middle of it. And helping people to depersonalize that. And I think that's a big thing too, is like we've trained up so many behavior analysts that like this is your whole identity, and you know, we can't depersonalize like, oh, I'm really pissing off this client. Oh, I don't know, can I cuss? Is that
absolutely.
Okay? You know, I'm like, I'm really just effing up this environment for this person, and that's on me, and that's not a reflection of me as a person. It's just like, okay, I need to fix this. I need to like stop for a minute and be very aware of self, so that I can then make the environment more reinforcing, right? Like what Skinner says, like, I can either be that person that creates a very coercive environment that is not full of reinforcement, or I can be that person that helps manipulate the environment, not that person, to be able to contact reinforcement, you know, and not transactional reinforcement, relational reinforcement. I like to give that example of like, just imagine like you went out to eat with somebody and they didn't enjoy the meal with you, they didn't partake in conversation, they just paid the bill for you. I mean, that's nice that they paid the bill, right? That's reinforcing, but you had no quality. There's no qualitative aspect to that. And I think as if we've got to get to that point where it's like, it's not as a sliver of Skittles. It's how real is this?
It's the bag 100%. With the support, with the opportunity to share it, with the great conversation.
Yes, absolutely.
The reason I think is one thing I'm learning, and I continue to learn as a leader, and where I fall short, and Hillary like will bring this to me, is that like, at times I don't take the perspective of like, what am I bringing into this environment, right? So like I could have, you know, a series of bad meetings or a series of conversations that just like were difficult, and then I don't separate from there to my next meeting. I come in with a certain energy or a certain vibe, as we'd say, and without intention, but not taking perspective and owning and reflecting like, on what I'm bringing to that moment. It has a significant impact on the team, the culture, how we set people up to thrive or not, and just a critical component for like leaders being able to like see themselves in that environment and what they're doing to contribute.
Right.
And I think I just want to make it for like this conversation, but also anyone listening. Like when you say leader, you're not talking about like somebody who's in 4 layers of leadership.
No.
You're talking about a technician. You're talking about a clinician. You're talking about anyone engaging in our service care delivery as a leader in some way.
Absolutely.
And I hear what you're like. I just love your metaphor. I think if it's okay, I'd like to use it sometime because it's a great metaphor of like, yay, I didn't have to spend $50 on food, but that's not really why I went for the meal. But I'm wondering, like, so that I think one of the reasons we wanted to make this podcast about staff is right now, like the idea of assent and compassion and like relationships is really a hot topic, which is great. And we really focus a lot on those topics with clients. But like, what are some ways you've experienced, or you've coached staff to do that? Like as that person in that context for each other, not so much for their clients, like relationally in a space with their colleagues, or as giving feedback to their technicians, or having conversations with their leaders. Like, how have you supported that growing and learning for them?
I think the very first step as a leader has been having that open door policy and developing the rapport with my staff that I have also taught them to build with their clients. If they can't come to me and tell me, like things that are happening in their life outside of this, right? If they don't feel comfortable doing that, then that's the first problem that I need to step back, self-reflect, and address. But when those relationships are there with my team, and things happen, as a leader, sometimes things in confidence that a team member is going through that we can't disclose. But when your entire team knows that you share in those experiences, or they have shared those experiences with you, it's very easy when teammates become frustrated with each other for me to pull that frustrated teammate in and say like, hey, I need to ask you to extend grace to this person. And I'm asking you to do this in kind of reflecting back on the moments that you needed that grace, and the times that I've asked you for grace from me because I have made a mistake or I have done something that's frustrating to you. And so creating that community, right, of like, we're all going through stuff. you know, and sometimes it hits somebody all at once. Sometimes, you know, it can just be one big thing. But when a teammate knows that you hold that space for them and kind of that protective, you know, ethos for them to be able to go through that situation and it not impact their or cause them to be concerned about the stability of their job or something like that, it's very easy to then have that conversation when they become frustrated with someone else because they don't know the whole story, to be able to say, hey, that grace that I have offered you and given you and provided for you and that your team has provided for you, we're now asking you to give back.
That's a great one.
And building that community, right? And making it very clear that, like, yes, we have to have systems in place. We have policies. We have a handbook. We have all of this, you know, systemic kind of thing in place. But the bigger, more important piece is that community we've built together. Because, you know, for that cheesy phrase, teamwork makes the dream work, right? It can't happen if that isn't there as well.
We talked recently about like giving the most generous interpretation. When situations like that come arise, like how do you assume positive intent, give the most generous interpretation? And what's interesting is that it's, to me anyways, a lot easier to do with the clients that you work with, right? Like when clients are not engaging in a way that you're wanting to them in that time, we fundamentally understand the environment is part of that.
Right.
And yet there becomes a disconnect when it is staff.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, and something I'll ask staff is, you know, in connection with the client, like, hey, we're teaching them these very skills, right? Because they clearly want to learn them, need to learn them. Have we ever stopped to think that we have teammates that didn't have the opportunity to learn that skill as well?
Yeah.
Right? And so as a leader, I have a responsibility to create a space where it's not just our learners learning, it's our techs and staff and team learning as well, because how can I be upset when they didn't have the opportunity that our learners have right now?
Is it a skill or a will? Yeah, and often it's a skill.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it makes me think about like allowing for non-judgmental time. So like in our framework, Hillary could say a lot
You
more
should do
eloquently
it.
about
I would love
this.
to hear you say it.
But in our framework, when a client is going through something that is difficult for them, or we've put a boundary in place that they can't cross, in a very kind and compassionate way, we have this protocol called STEAM, where we set the boundary very clear. We tack that it's like hard. We can see that's hard for them. We empathize, and we allow for non-judgmental time. I'm thinking the reason why I'm saying this is allowing for non-judgmental time is allowing clients to feel. And I'm wondering if that's a skill that not all of our staff
Absolutely.
like are comfortable like sitting in feelings and like not moving on, right?
For themselves.
For themselves.
I mean, like, it is hard to do for our clients, but because you need to have some skills of regulation yourself to sit in the shit with somebody. But if it's your own shit, that is a whole nother layer of regulation, awareness, reflection, and like even being able to acknowledge and see that you're having a feeling. Like, I mean, I say this frequently. I don't have any data to support this phrase, but I do think like the majority of people are in therapy because they were never taught how to sit in the shit. And we're constantly avoiding and pushing emotions down and avoiding those feelings. And what you're talking about is asking people to sit in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we call that therapeutic alliance. That's so
That's
awesome.
what we call it
That's what we call it too.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Yeah.
And it's very similar. It's like, hey, like when we're holding a boundary of safety, these are the things that you can do, because holding that boundary does not become more effective with a harsh tone.
No.
None of that like makes it more effective. So you can still do it with
In fact,
compassion.
it's more effective when you do it the other way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that when I'm interviewing a potential new hire is I bring that very thing up. Hey, when we work with individuals, whether it's this population, when you're working with any other human, there is going to be things that they do that will trigger shit that you thought you had either buried deep enough or had dealt with and worked through. And you're going to find that you bristle in those moments, and that is not the learner. That is you.
It's you. Wherever you go, there you are.
And so do you have skills and do you have coping mechanisms in place already? Or is that something that if you do join our team that we need to work on, right? And it's not that I'm going to be your therapist,
No, of course not.
but what resources can I provide for you, because you know yourself well enough that you know that's going to come up.
You're not learning that in the 40-hour training.
No.
No.
Or your BACB coursework, or in most places you're not learning that. I love that, and what it makes me think about is like we're talking about that mostly in the context of clients, but as adults we have to set boundaries with other adults, and that is really hard. Like I mean, like generally adults find it very easy to set boundaries and be controlling with children because the dynamics are different. There's a power differential, and that matters a lot. But generally, that power differential, while it still exists in many spaces, shrinks significantly when it's another adult.
Absolutely.
And so, setting boundaries, having difficult conversations becomes even harder. And I'm curious, like, you know, a staff member comes into your organization, they say, "I have those skills. I'm good. Like, I'm great. I can handle it." And then this comes up with another staff member, and they don't have the regulation skills, and they're pushing things down, and it's causing a lot of conflict. What do you do as a leader of your team to support them when it's clear that like someone in this relationship is really struggling with this, like sitting in the shit?
Right, yeah. So one of the things that we have is our director of work culture and advocacy. So a person, you know, because as we've grown, I do still have that open door policy, but I can't always dedicate, you know, that quality moment in time that they deserve. And so having someone in that role that it very intentionally is checking in constantly, right? And working with them on that person being able to tact their own triggers. Like, you know, because people can say like, oh, I've got it. Like, you know, I know self-care, I know, you know, but being able to tact that is a skill, even that we're working with our learners on. You can feel an emotion and still not be able to label it, and much less know the variable or stimuli that led to that emotion happening. So, you know, we have staff that are in that same position. So, you know, creating space for them to, one, feel, right, and identify when they're trying to escape, right, sitting in the shit, and then being able to tact their own, you know, inner emotions and thoughts, and then behaviors that come after that. Because then once they can do that, then guess what? We can start looking for it. Because being able to also ask for help or say, I'm burning out, we all know this, right? We're in this helping, you know, industry because we love to help, and we don't like to admit when we are burned out. So.
It's another skill that has to be developed. Asking for help.
We've been talking a lot about how like one of our values in our framework is like recognizing and focusing on happy, relaxed, and engaged for learners, and we like see that as a baseline for our learners. Like, if you don't know what to do, you can always work on getting to joy. You can always work on getting back to baseline. And it makes somewhat of an easy, not completely easy, but a decision framework for our staff. But when you are an employee, you don't always get that option, right? Like you have contingencies on getting paid so you can feed your family, so that you can afford to live, and you're in the you're struggling in your work, but you still have to go, right? And that contingency is on the human being, but then there's a contingency on their leader is like, you're not functioning at work in the way that we need you to function at work. So how do you recommend that people consider that context for the employee, for example, or a person working with us, that they're having this hard time and they're in an EO, and we also want to make sure that they have a baseline at work? How do you do anything with that at your organization, where you like help people see that when they're not there?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, like, you know, I stumbled across, you know, PFA, SBT, all of, you know, the HRE, you know, several years ago. And, you know, I really sat with it for a while, and then, you know, pulled in a lot of like my lived experience, you know, just trying to figure out like how it fit, where it fit. And I realized that while it's baseline, there's another layer that we have to add. And so we call it RRE, which is regulated, responsive, and empowered.
I love that.
Because, you know, one of the things that happens is people hear happy and they assume a certain pattern of behaviors, right? And it's like, you're not always going to be happy. You know, joy and happiness are two completely different things. And so moving starting with that baseline and then moving forward to what are the skills to get someone to be right in that RRE is critical, because we can't always be happy, but from baseline to this, there's a set of skills, right? There's this space of, when I can't be here, what do I need to still be able to be in RRE?
Because you can be RRE, I love that. I love acronyms, so I like that one. You could be RRE while you're, like, I think about learners who have a really difficult time with, being asked to transition, for example. And for them, we might focus on happy, relaxing, like just making sure they're in a place where that we know how to support them in that moment and not push them through that difficult moment, because they're not RRE.
Right.
But you have other learners who are perfectly fine moving through, or sometimes they have a fine time moving through that transition, and sometimes they don't, meaning that sometimes they are RRE. They're not HRE. They're not like, I'm perfectly joyful and happy to make this transition and do all this crap. That's not really what they're doing, but it's just what's coming to mind. It's been a long day. But with RRE, like, I really like that, because what you're talking about is in the face of context that I might not enjoy, or in the face of stimuli that may or may not be difficult for me to manage, I can still persist and be regulated, responsive and empowered. And I don't have to have that, like, baseline HRE to do that. And that's truly what we want for our learners. That's, to me, what you're describing is resiliency.
Yes, and grit.
And grit. And I think if we're set up to do a lot of things well, but I think as behavior analysts and in our field, I think one thing that we are set up to do very well is build resiliency and grit in a way that is still client-centered, still empowers them to be safe. But those are the life skills.
Yes.
Because I can learn anything if I have grit and if I have resiliency.
Yes. And the foundation to that is an authentic therapeutic relationship.
Yes.
Right? Because when you're in the weeds and you've built that rapport, not just pairing, right? Not just like a day of pairing. It's building, I mean, think about it like your own, if you go to therapy, you're not going to go through the weeds with some therapist that you don't trust.
Correct.
Right? And I like to also kind of use the analogy of, like, if you're a runner and you have a really good coach, right? There's going to be that HRE day, right? Where you're like, oh, this is a fun workout. Like, it's nice and easy. We can have that conversation. And then the next workout is, all right, we're pushing it. It's going to suck. You're going to cry. Everything's going to hurt, and you're going to hate me. And I'm RRE, where I'm like, fudge.
Yeah.
But I can do this.
But I can do this. I want to do this because I want to see if I can get to the other side of that, right? I want to feel that success. And so I think it's something that we implement, not just at the learner level, but with our staff, right? So when our staff are going through difficult things, whether in the clinic context or outside of the context, I can ask, like, okay, are you regulated, right? Or do you have that where, yes, you have stressors, you're not happy, but do you have the skills and tools you need to maintain regulation? Because you can't co-regulate if you're not regulated. And so if you're not regulated, let me help and co-regulate with you, so that then that will trickle down to you being able to co-regulate with your learner. And then, are you oh my gosh, my mind just went blank. I'm like you. I'm like, I need that Celsius right here.
Take a sip.
Are you responsive, right? In other words, are you coming from a place where you can respond and not react?
Yeah.
Are you regulated enough that knee jerk of, like, I'm gonna grab that kid, or I'm gonna hold that kid, or I'm gonna put hands on that kid when we don't operate that way?
Yep.
Are you going to go back to behaviors that you have extinguished? I don't need a spontaneous recovery of your past clinic experience because you're not regulated and you're not responsive. So being able to check in that way, and then are you empowered? Have I done what I need to empower you with everything you possibly need to be successful in this context and in this environment and in this situation? And so the beautiful thing about RRE is the onus is not completely on that person, right? My influence, again, right? What am I doing?
As a person in the context, in the environment.
Yes.
This is the exact conversation we wanted to have.
I know, I agree.
Yeah.
And you know what?
This week, not like just like this is the conversation her and I wanted to have, and this is incredible.
What I want to say is that, like, I heard Timothy, like, there's some things you said that he's like, because we've said some of the same things, and I just, like, it is really validating to hear you say those things, and, like, encouraging, because I don't know, it's cool to find don't know, that therapeutic alliance. Like very often when I'm having these conversations with folks, like these are like terms from psychology, right? They're not studied in our literature. And so sometimes it's hard to get others to take themselves out of the rigorous ABA science world and step in with our sisters in psychology and say, like, this is safe. This is also a safe place for us to draw from for our interventions. And then to extend to, why are you laughing?
Well, I was thinking, and also sometimes they like cite us in research for saying things like this. So,
True.
so
Throw that back on the podcast.
Right. Well, and I think it was LeBlanc in 2012 or 13 that had an article that was fantastic that talked about you need to do research outside of our discipline and our journals.
You do.
We didn't come up with evidence-based practices.
No.
We didn't come up with any
And single subject research is wonderful and amazing, but it's not the only research.
and it's very limiting.
And it's very limiting.
Yeah.
What you were talking about reminds me so much, I hope it's okay that I bring this up, of Shauna and
Yeah.
what she's coached. So Timothy and I both have worked with the same speech coach, and she has taught us this thing called REPS, which is like regulation tools. And one of the things we talked with her about separately, we didn't do this together, but separately, is like, practicing those skills in very controlled context, just like we do with our learners, and then working to generalize those skills to fluency. So like in the moment when you're having those big feelings, when you're feeling dysregulated, when you're feeling that you aren't in control, that you're not empowered, that you have that quickness to be like, I know how to recenter myself and get myself back. And while like it's maybe not the tool for everyone, I think it can be helpful for most people. I mean, it's like a basic, it's the basic like, it's somewhat of the basic anxiety of like name 5 things, listen for 4 things, touch 3 things type of thing with some additional components of it. That's not the only way, right? Like there are ways we can teach our staff to cope and to get to, I love RRE. I'm just obsessed with that idea so much because it's not HRE, especially for our staff, it's not HRE.
No.
It isn't for our clients too, but like when we think about our staff, like you're at work.
it's stressful.
It's hard.
You can find joy in it.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And there are
But-
things that are wonderful.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if you could get paid $1 million, you probably still wouldn't do that.
Right.
Maybe some people would. I probably would. Some other people might, but it's not your preferred context, right? And so, like, I'm really excited about this conversation.
Me too.
Are there, like, specific, so, like, I'm sorry, I'm going on and my brain is going faster than my mouth. But, like, what you're saying and what I'm hearing is that you can be there for people to co-regulate with you. And I think that is very important that we find the safe people in our lives and at work in an appropriate way to co-regulate with. But you are only one person. And what are, like, on top of that, maybe being like the initial entry point to teaching those skills and like having those conversations and helping someone co-regulate, are there any additional tools or skills you're like, I know this toolbox or arsenal of things could be helpful for you, and this is what we're going to practice or start to scale so that when we see someone in this space, we know, hey, you should go, let's co-regulate together, and then here's a toolbox I want you to try. Do you have anything like that?
So I would say that we probably do more of like a BST model,
Okay.
right? So like if I'm building a model, right, that I want to see replicated, then I have to create opportunities for my staff to experience co-regulation on the receiving end,
Yes.
and then provide opportunities for, hey, we've got a new tech. I think there's some areas where you might kind of align, like when you were first a tech. Right, I'm seeing some similarities here, and I feel like it's a wonderful opportunity for you to nurture and guide them. Because what team member is not going to be excited to have that opportunity, right, to be on the giving end? And so it's not necessarily a toolbox, but more of a very organic, this is kind of, our...
Like community ownership of some sort,
Absolutely.
right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Because if you can't become one of the greatest things that you can do, right, and to learn a skill is to teach it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if I don't provide an opportunity for them to teach what they've been learning, what I've been teaching them, then what do they do with that knowledge? Yes, it benefits them in that immediate kind of context, but to be able to go out and to someone who is feeling that stress or feeling they need that additional support, it feels good,
It does.
right? To be able to say like, let me help you,
Yeah.
because someone else helped me.
And then
I'm imagining, real quick, I'm imagining
ahead.
there might be someone watching that doesn't know what co-regulation is.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh.
It's a good one. Well, I think like many people, most behavior analysts I know talk about regulation, right? Like self-regulation. And like for some reason Western society has this like obsession with self-regulation, and like when I think about self-regulation, it means like as a singular organism, when you're having something difficult happen, or there's a moment in time or a period of time that you're unable to cope with your circumstances, right? And however that shows up for a human is however it shows up for a human, whether that's through behaviors that are not conducive to the environment, whether that's internal behaviors that are creating conditions inside of yourself that are not measurable or observable necessarily. Maybe it's an increased heart rate, that are putting you out of a state of being able to handle additional additions to that environment or to that context. I hope I'm clear. That you're like the self-regulation idea is that single organism is responsible for moving through that, getting back to a place where they're okay, and moving on, right? And the best example I have of self-regulation, and is no hate to anyone who does this, because as a parent, I get it, but we ask our young children to self-regulate so they can sleep very often, and we teach this idea of like sleeping alone in a crib with maybe a pacifier or a blanket, and we give them some tools, babies tools, to self-regulate so that they will sleep, so that parents don't have to wake up a million times in the night, they have some alone time in the evening. And some babies do well with that. They do great with it. Some parents are like, this is not me, but some parents are like, it would took 2 nights of them crying and fussing for 2 minutes. They slept, now they sleep 12 hours a night. And I'm like, that is lovely. I am so happy for you. But then you also have families who report that it takes their child 4 hours of screaming to self-regulate. There are families who talk about their children really struggling to go back to sleep because they don't necessarily have those somewhat ingrained initial self-regulation skills. And co-regulation, and I think this metaphor works really well for co-regulation. Co-regulation is the idea that you don't have to be a single organism. That like I can, as a single organism, be having this moment, and there can be a human in my space who isn't having that moment. And they are at a space that's safe, they're comfortable, they're not dysregulated. And so you can scientifically like sync up with that. It's both ways, but initially co-regulation is taught by one person syncing up with the other person. And this is like one of the easiest ways that we as humans do this is that babies self-regulate by listening to their mother's heartbeat and with their mother's breathing. And so with the sleeping metaphor, like this is why myself and millions of parents around the world co-sleep, because you don't have to worry about a crying baby, because generally, not always, because we can co-regulate by like skin touching, we can co-regulate by breathing together, by a heartbeat syncing, by nursing, right? Like those are all co-regulation skills that require more than one single organism. And so what you're talking about is you are a regulated person, and you're in with somebody who is dysregulated, and you're able to bring their energy levels at 100 and you're at a 10, and you're able to bring your 10 and help them come down to a 50 and maybe a 40.
Right.
And then maybe not a 10, but back into a space where they can move forward without having to shove it down.
Right.
Because that's what we often do is we're like, I'm dysregulated, I'm gonna shove it down. I'm not gonna do anything about that, and I'm gonna shove it down and shove it down and shove it down. And when we do that, what happens is it erupts eventually, and usually not in a healthy way. I'm going off on a tangent, but like this is where we get into addiction studies and like self-harm studies in psychology. But if we have good co-regulators, then we don't have to turn to that stuffing down and then continuing to stuff it down and find other ways to stuff down. We learn how to sit in the shit. Right. Because someone's sitting in the shit with us and they're making it a safe place because they are not in the shit.
Right.
They're like, you're in this shitty place and I am not, but I can sit in it with you and be okay. And that also means you're gonna be okay.
Right.
And we can do that together. And so that would be my off-the-cuff explanation of co-regulation. I wonder if you would add anything to that.
Yeah, no, I think you did that beautifully. I think it also is probably, we see resistance to it because as a society we're very much individualistic.
Yes.
Right? And it's all about this like independence, when really in reality not a single one of us are independent, because unless you're growing your own food, you're milking your own cows, someone is assisting you as you go to the grocery store to pick out all those things, right? So there is this level of community and collectivism. And so I also co-slept with the 3 of my babies. And that's, from a cultural, standpoint and being close and again, getting to sleep.
Yes.
Right. And so, and I get that, there's no right and there's no wrong.
There's no right or wrong.
People need to find what works for them. And I think it's just one of those things that as we kind of navigate, like, hey, there's really no such thing as independent, and that's okay. It's not a threat to you and your identity, but I think we're also seeing the repercussion of being so hyper individual and so hyper independent, because we have so many people now that place themselves in silos and find themselves isolated. And COVID was this horribly
horrific,
wonderful social experiment where we realized that these systems that have been created, and we've been duped and convinced into thinking like these systems can replace community, and I've got everything that I need, and then the systems start to crumble and you're looking around like, I have nothing and no one. And so co-regulation is also at like a brain neuroscientific level something that's very critical, and it's not just this hooey stuff. There is science and brain development, and we know things, and outside of our field we have that evidence.
Yes, we do.
And it's very clear. And so I tell my staff, you are the surrogate frontal lobe for these children. That thing that you're expecting them to do, that's frontal lobe stuff. It's not even awake yet. And so you're in this environment, you're this stimuli, and you're causing them to go into their back brain, which is fight, flight, freeze, right? And so you want them to do something that the frontal lobe is supposed to do that isn't even going to really wake up until 9, 10, 11, 12, isn't going to mature until, for women, 25, 27, men, 32. So your boyfriend who's 25 can't even do this, and you want this 5-year-old to do this? So I think, we have to step back and go, oh my gosh, there's a whole other, branch of science, whole, other disciplines that know a lot more about this than we do. And we've got to take that humility step back of, yes, co-regulation. It has to happen, because you have a child whose brain is not fully developed. It's still wiring. And what you do in that environment is going to shape the way that brain is wired.
Yeah, 100%. I just to take this further into our theme this season is that co-regulation never ends. Yeah. And so 60, 70-year-old people, it doesn't matter your age, it never ends. It's always a biological, physiological need of humans. And if we think about that with staff, I've done a lot of therapy. I've done a lot of work to improve my own regulation skills. But was it Monday, Tuesday? I don't remember. There was a day this week where I was like, I can't do this alone. And I actually pulled a coworker aside and I was like, I'm about to have a breakdown and I don't know what to do, because I have been in a remote work setting for so long, and I'm in this conference and there's a lot of people. And this is a new context for me to use those skills, and I need someone to help me. And I need someone to breathe with me, and I need someone to sit with me and just literally sit in the shit. And I picked my amazing colleague, Dr. Emily Callahan, to sit with me, because she's also a psychologist. And so she doesn't try to say it's okay. She sits in it and she says, this is really hard. And that is co-regulation that I need. And I've done a lot of work on my skills. And so I think, when it comes to our staff, it's great to do the BST model. It's great to support them in this way. And it's also okay for it not to be perfect. It's okay for them to be today's a bad day and I'm having a hard time, and seek that co-regulation out at any point in time. Because we need it as human beings.
Oh, absolutely.
I hope my kids do that when they're 30, 40, 50, is to come to me as their mom to help them regulate, because life is hard, and it's hard to do it alone.
That's one of the things that I love. I have a 17-year-old, she's getting ready to graduate. I have a 16-year-old and then a 9-year-old. And I think one of my favorite things is, knowing that they co-slept with me. My older two transitioned to their own beds around 2 and 3. My 9-year-old, a little bit longer.
Yeah.
He's very sensitive. He's he is the one that makes me a liar out of applying the principles of ABA. He turns the contingencies on me, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, thank you.
Yeah.
Because teaching me so many lessons.
Yeah, you keep me humble. But now that my older two, they're getting ready to leave the nest, but I would say probably once a month, every now and then on a Friday, my daughter will just come in and she's like, I want to lay on the bed with you, Mom, and I just want to eat snacks and watch movies. And so she'll end up falling asleep, and my husband knows that he's got to go crash with the youngest. And so just those moments of co-regulation, it's not necessarily always when someone's in distress either. Right? Or they may not even just communicate it. Yeah, it's connection. Yeah. And that's not a bad thing in our field.
No.
We're so worried about transference and all of these things. that we're really sacrificing like our humanity. We're allowing ABA and the field and the science to become our identity instead of infusing our humanity into the science. And our bedside manner is suffering for it.
The complexity of life is like trying to whittle it down to a singular function of a behavior. The complexity of life doesn't fit into that box.
No.
Right? Like it's too interconnected. Like it's too interconnected. And by trying to do that, we lose, I'm just repeating what you said, but like we do lose sight of what we're trying to do. We are trying to create contexts where humans can be successful. We are trying to give people the skills to have a great quality of life.
Absolutely.
And by really hyper focusing on like these very specific scientific principles and how we want them to be showing up for us in our applied settings, I think often lose that, and we focus more on like your procedural fidelity and like there's not a multiple function for that behavior and it's just attention. And it's like, but doesn't it really matter? If at the end of the day, like this human being is looking for attention and we need to teach them ways to get attention, and their entire life they're going to need to get this co-regulation, which is attention.
Yeah, and connection.
But yes.
Yeah. And that's what I tell my staff. It's like, look, I need you to split this whole behavior and the function, split it apart for me, okay? What's the underlying message? Okay.
It's an underlying need.
Can we ignore the delivery?
Yeah.
Right? Because they're going to deliver it in sometimes the most effective way they know how, which isn't always safe, which isn't always, what we want to see, but it's the message that we have to not lose as we're focusing so much on the delivery of the message, the way in which it was given and received.
Reminds me of what
And
Nasia said.
Nasia talked about not listening for what, but listening for the for. Like you're listening for,
not listening about, but listening for.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's the underlying message that you're hearing? And like,
Not
just
the
staying
details.
non-judgmental
Yeah.
and curious about that, and like leaning into that. Like maybe the delivery was terrible. I do this.
We all do.
We all do this, and to be extended the grace and the most generous interpretation allows us to move through that moment rather than stick in that moment. Because what if we stick in that moment on the delivery, we lose the opportunity to help with the need. And that's what we're here to do as like leaders for everyone that we interact with, especially in a workspace, but like in our communities and our relationships, is that we should be trying to meet needs, support needs, and have that collaboration, that co-regulation between each other.
Absolutely.
To help each other do those things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that.
This has been an enjoyable conversation.
Very enjoyable.
I really
Thank you.
appreciate taking the time.
Likewise.
We have one final question that we ask everyone. We are on the HRE podcast. So when you want to describe one of your HREs,
What makes you happy, relaxed, and engaged?
what makes you happy, relaxed, and engaged?
Quality time with my family, my kids. Yeah,
What does that
my
look like?
husband. Oh man, lately it's been playing Overcooked with my kids.
What's that?
It's this really cute game where you are each characters and your chefs, and like these orders come across, and you have to like quickly make the orders. So you have to work together. It's an Xbox game.
That is so cool.
So, and it's really funny because when I play with my husband, he's like, this is so stressful. I'm like, this is so relaxing to me. And he's like, what are you doing? Like, you're over here. And he's like, this is the order we should be doing it. But then when my husband and my two sons are playing like Fortnite or something like that, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so stressful. Like someone's coming behind you. And my husband's like, no, this is like relaxing. So I find it really fascinating that like those two different things, you know, can elicit stress responses. But my family's also been trying to teach me how to play Fortnite, so I'm trying. But really just any time that we're together and like there's just lively conversation and I'm hearing about my kids' day and I'm hearing about, you know, the things that they're experiencing. And, you know, when they come to us and they're like, Mom, Dad, you know, like what are my barriers? Like what am I not doing right? You know, or watching my youngest in a theater performance. He just performed in The Hobbit. And so cool. he was Dwalin. He was, you know, one of the dwarves, and he didn't have a lot of lines, but he had a glorious death. And so he was so excited about that. And you know, he actually got like gasps from the audience, and we were joking. We went from like a G-rated theater performance to like PG-13 because he embellished
had the drama.
Yes. And so really just being with them and that quality time, and that's I think one of the hardest things as a clinic owner. Right, is
protecting that time
because it's two different passions, right?
Yeah.
And so in one frame, you know, just like showing my kids what it's like to work really hard, right? Showing my kids what it's like to struggle, to come home and be like, oh my God, I don't know if we're gonna stay open, y'all. Like, this is it, this could be it. And then seeing them getting to see me persist and not give up.
Grit, resiliency.
Yes, so it's kind of a catch-22.
Yeah.
So
I love that.
Awesome.
This has been wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so
for
much.
joining us.
thank you. Thank
I'm
you
so
much.
glad that we had the opportunity to chat.
Yeah.
Likewise, I'm very honored to get to spend this time with you.
That was so good. I was so excited to talk to her. I actually have never really had like a one-on-one personal conversation with Mari, and we were riding up here in the elevator, and you were like, I am so nervous because I like have never.
I've never talked to her or met her. I followed her on Instagram.
Yeah.
Right. And that's like some of her posts have brought up conversations that we've had and like
That are difficult.
That are difficult to have.
Because she is like very, and I appreciate this about her, just why I follow her. She brings a different perspective. She's challenging. She calls out some of like the inequities, the things that are challenging about the field, and like including things around private equity.
Yeah. And I think the advice you gave me in the moment was just be curious. And I think that's, one of the strings that have threaded this whole season today, to date. But what that brought about was like the exact conversation that I've been wanting to have with you, right? Like we've been talking about how do you create HRE for staff, and in reality, you can't always do that. And probably you're not generally doing that. Whenever I ask them about their HRE, sometimes it's work stuff, but like
you can't, your context of happy, relaxed, it's not work.
it's
usually.
not work. Yeah, because you can't remove the EO.
Right.
And so she introduced us to a
RRE,
RRE,
which is amazing.
Yes.
I haven't stopped thinking about it.
100%.
I can't remember what the second R stands for.
Responding
That's right.
versus like reactive.
So it is, I'm blanking.
So it is
Regulated,
regulated,
responding, and empowered.
empowered. Yeah, I think that's
It's so powerful.
so powerful because those are things that we can teach, right?
Yes.
Those are skills that we can like direct.
And set up an environment to
Support
it,
Yep.
especially for that empowered component.
Yeah, and it's part of the conversation that we've had, or I've been having with, like thinking about how we prepare our technicians, right? Like a lot of our training's on like skills, right? Like do this, do like, and how you do this, or these terms, and like, and it's all good in the sense, but like we don't also just teach them how to like be in difficult moments, and how to have a difficult time in your job, and like what are the things you need to do in those moments,
And how to make decisions.
how to make decisions
For that
in
empowerment part.
and as a leader, how to support your people when they're going through hard things. Like
It was powerful.
it was a powerful thing.
Literally life-changing moment for me with Mari. And I thanked her, but like I thanked her after. I went to her book. Congratulations, by the way.
Yeah.
Like they published a book, and we had they threw an awesome celebration for that last night. And even there, I was like, you just blew me away. Like I think many of the episodes we've had the opportunity and the privilege to record have reminded me that I know nothing.
Yeah.
And it's been very humbling, and in the best way possible, of like, sometimes you get a little too comfortable, right? And like, I think I've gotten a little comfortable in like what I know and where I'm good. And these episodes have been like, Hillary, you've got to up your game. You need to connect in different ways and learn in different ways and expand your skills in a way that I really haven't stretched myself to do in a while.
Yeah.
And I love that, like, because I love to learn. I love to grow. I love to be challenged. And I don't know, I'm very reinforced by like like for Mari, I'm like, you say all the things I want to know how to say the way you said them, because like I believe everything that you're saying, and your message hit me in such a powerful way. Like I want to make sure that people are getting that message in a powerful way, like at our organization, from
Correct.
you, from me, from Ed, from Britt. Like she's amazing.
Yeah. I used to left encouraged, left excited about how we can like work with her more, and how we can partner, just seeing ways we can support.
Elevate her voice.
Elevator voice, 100%. And I also like to some degree, like in some ways, like our missions overlap.
Very much so.
And what she's trying to accomplish and what we're trying to accomplish as an
I
organization.
loved what she had to say about staff.
Yeah.
Like, I think it was very discreet to some extent, in a way that I hadn't considered or heard previously. Even like outside of our podcast episodes, like just the ideas of how you discreetly do those things. It was actionable, and real and accessible, right? Like the idea of co-regulation. I'm so glad that we talked about
Yeah.
that, because I think that is a great misconception that we have around our clients and our staff, is that like they should be prepared to do it alone. And you can't. Like that's not how we're wired. And co-regulation is a good thing. And I also was thinking about our technicians who are in homes, right? Like they don't have a community. They have a community around them, but is it appropriate for them to co-regulate with a family?
Right.
Maybe, maybe not. I don't know that I've fully thought through that, but how do we give them the opportunity to co-regulate when they're, really dysregulated? And one thing about RRE, being in homes is really hard.
Agreed.
And in a center culture, you can ask for someone to hang out with your kid, go sit with someone like Mari and be like, I need a minute with you, and it's available. But that might not be true for somebody in home. And so how do we replicate that in a way that's accessible?
Yeah.
And I don't know, I deeply appreciate that she called that out. I said it on the podcast, but like, I'm going to shout out my dear friend, Emily Callahan. Like, she's a great co-regulator for me. And I really was able to tack that when we were talking of like, I have so much trust with her. And I know that like, she's non-judgmental when I talk, like when I'm dysregulated and saying things I shouldn't say, she gives me that grace. And that takes a lot of vulnerability. And so, I just found that really
Actually makes me
inspiring.
think about Ed and Britt's conversation.
Yes.
Right. So like if we had talked to them, after, I think that would provide a different frame with which, like, how do they operate as mentors and coaches
And co-regulators.
and co-regulators through some hard and challenging times.
Yeah. I don't think their answers would have changed.
Yeah. My perspective on the conversation, maybe what I asked would have changed.
Yeah. But I think they would have said, like, you sit in difficult moments, you take a step back, you shape, you talk through it, you take a deep breath together, you decide that we're stopping right now and we're going to do this in a different format. Right. There have been many times that Britt in particular, she's so good at this, and she challenges me because I'm like, I'm very much a be productive. And of course I know and believe that building relationships is productive.
Yeah.
I do. And I that's how I do with everybody that I work with. But she challenges me in that very often she'll skip the opportunity to like directly coach someone to meet with them or stop a direct coaching session to meet with them. And I'm like, but you need the direct coaching. They need to learn in the moment. But she challenges me in the best way to say, like, but they also needed to take us a moment. It was too much. And they needed a moment to like recollect themselves, have a difficult conversation with me, challenge me. That's Britt. And that's what Britt is talking about when she's doing that is what I heard Mari talking about when she sits with staff and allows them to co-regulate.
Yep.
And I just think that's a beautiful thing that our staff deserve.
Agreed.
And how do we do that for them?
Yep. And how do we coach and develop our
People.
leaders to be able to do that for them?
Right, and and again, every time you say leaders, I just want everyone to hear you're talking about technicians, you're talking about clinicians, you're talking about you, me, right? Like anyone in our organization who's engaging with others is a leader.
Agreed.
Even some of our clients in centers where they're getting ready to move on, and they're leaders to their peers, and hopefully leaders for us too, because we can learn something from everybody.
Agreed.
Yeah, it was great.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And that concludes another episode of the HRE podcast.
Thanks for listening. If the HRE podcast is a part of your synthesized reinforcers, let us know what else would make the perfect reinforcement context for you in the comments below, and join us next time.